So Dave,
So
the other Dave said he couldn't make it today.
Okay, cool.
This episode is sponsored by Compose.io. Compose is a fully managed database hosting with extra security, scaling, and performance. Hosted on dedicated SSD servers, you can pick from 9 highly available databases: MongoDB, Elasticsearch, Redis. Compose Enterprise comes with easy scaling, which means you can add additional nodes at any time. It's auto-scaled resources like storage, memory, and IOPS, RESTful APIs, central console to manage all your deployments, and premium support with guaranteed response time and priority ticketing. With Compose Enterprise, you can free up your time to focus on building your app instead of managing your database. Check them out at enterprise.compose.com. And if you try Compose, you'll get a free special edition t-shirt. Hurry, quantities are limited. That's enterprise.compose.com.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Jason Sweat.
Hello.
Brian Hogan.
Hi everyone.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that's David Is it Hemmat or Hemmat?
Hemmat, yeah.
Do you want to give us a brief introduction, and then we can dive right into our topic today?
Sure, thanks a lot for having me. So basically, I'm a developer. I've been doing Ruby on Rails development for about 6-7 years now. And I went to college in Dominican Republic. And when I graduated, I started working for some companies here locally. After that, I started working for some US-based companies remotely. And at some point, I realized there was a kind of gap that we could bridge. There were a lot of good developers here in the DR, really talented guys, excellent English and excellent skills. And they were doing fairly low-paid jobs here. And part of it was that they didn't have access to better opportunities. And by access, I mean these developers didn't have a way to reach these opportunities that we had abroad. And at some point, I had a friend who wrote to me, and he asked, do you have any developer friends that you might recommend? I said, sure. I know a few developers. Let's talk about, what you're looking for, and I'll sit down and I'll find somebody for you that's a good fit. And so I did. He started working part-time with this developer, and we realized there was an opportunity that we could turn into a company here. And so that's pretty much what we've been doing for the past 3 years. We have a number of clients in the US and Canada, and we try to connect them with developers in Latin America. We focused on Latin America specifically for a couple reasons. One of the main reasons is time zone. So we're looking for people who are in the same time zones as our clients. We generally look between Eastern time and Pacific time, and Latin America is the perfect place to do that. Then another reason is that there are some cultural differences between developers and work culture in Latin America and in other parts of the world. One of the most common complaints that we had from our customers when we were talking about having developers abroad was, we've had different communication issues with them. We'll speak to the developers. We'll ask whether what we want to do is possible. Everybody will say yes, and then they'll come back a month later and nothing will be done. And yeah, and it's a simple matter of feeling uncomfortable with saying no or raising your hand when there was an issue. And, these are all common complaints that we've had. And we found that developers in Latin America have had a lot of experience working with US-based companies. The work culture that's been adopted by software companies in Latin America is generally a US work culture. So you'll get the same kind of behavior from your developers. They'll be comfortable raising their hand and saying, this is a bad idea, we should talk about it. Or saying, I just don't understand. Let's discuss this before we move forward, which is something that we have seen that doesn't often happen in other parts of the world. That's not to say that developers in other parts of the world aren't great. It's just you have to learn how to work with them, and it's a little bit more difficult sometimes.
Yep. Now, it's interesting just talking about this from this standpoint, because I've hired people to do various jobs for me from Philippines, from Pakistan, as well as from Brazil and Argentina. I've worked with people from Mexico, some of the companies that I contracted with, and some of them were programmers and some of them weren't. And it's interesting just the way you're talking through this. I don't know that I had anyone tell me yes and then not deliver so much as they would just kind of disappear for a while, especially in Pakistan, India, and Philippines. It's like, hi, are you there? And then a couple days later, you finally get oh, sorry, I had this thing happen, or, we had a typhoon or something. But, some of these people, it's like, well, you don't have a typhoon every other week. So,
Well, that's one of those indications, even if you, just for anyone that's a freelancer, it's one of those indications that maybe they're overextended. They've got a lot going on, and you're just not high enough on the priority list for them. That's usually how I read that. And that's one of those things that if you're working remotely or you're freelancing, it just always kind of comes back to the idea that staying in constant communication with the people you're working for is really important. And if you can't do that, maybe you're overextended.
Right. So I think there's a few elements there. For sure, there are some environment elements that affect. So, for example, we have tried to work with people in Venezuela, which is in Latin America, and we have decided that it's, for the most part, not a good idea. And that's funny because I'm originally from Venezuela, but just the current political and economic situation there gives us a lot of trouble. There's, power outages, there's internet outages. And so we can't have somebody who's reliably working with us every day unless they, set up a system to work around those issues. And so I'm sure that there are some environmental issues that affect. But the other thing is that not all developers are good freelancers. In the sense that being a good freelancer requires a little bit of a different skill set. You have to be willing to communicate on time and adequately and say, look, I have a number of things that I have to do. I'll be able to get to your item in 3 days or in 1 week sometimes. And a lot of people just don't feel comfortable doing that. And the way we've approached this is that we're not necessarily looking for freelancers. In fact, most of our developers are not freelancers. They are people who have been working a full-time job elsewhere, and we've offered them a better opportunity. And so we've tried to structure some things around that to avoid some of these communication issues. And, it's simple stuff. Time tracking is one. So we have a pretty uniform way of tracking time. We ask developers to kind of log their hours every day that they work with a small description of what they've been doing. Then another is to have a little email sent at the end of the day, kind of like a daily report saying, today I worked on this, tomorrow I'm expecting to work on this, and these are some of the challenges I'm facing. So that's on the developer side. We have to have some of these tools in place so that they can be successful. Because you can take a great developer and put him in a position, and if you don't have the tools in place so that they can communicate properly, then they're not going to be successful.
I can just second that. So of the 3 people that I've worked with in Latin America, I had one guy that he was in Brazil and he just didn't work out, and that was the main problem. Whereas the other 2, the developer that I worked with in Mexico, I didn't hire him. He actually just was contracting for a company I was working for. It was a pairing culture, and so he had to be on with us every day. And so, a lot of these issues didn't exist. And then the last person that I'm thinking of, he's actually been on this show, I think once or twice, and did some work for me for a few years. And he was really good about just making sure that I knew what was going on down in Argentina. And so, that's usually what it boils down to for me is, am I hearing back from these folks? And do I know what's going on?
Right. And these are issues that you could have with a developer in the US if he's remote also. It's just different to have somebody in office. Another part of what we try to work around is that we have to work with our clients and make sure that they have the systems in place. So do you have a proper project management tool where the developer can go in and see what he's supposed to be working on next? Are you using any kind of development methodology? It could be Scrum, it could be any variant that you want, but just having some of these things in place really makes things move forward quickly. And ultimately, there are challenges with working remotely, but the advantage is that you get really good developers that you wouldn't be able to find locally, or you wouldn't be able to find them for a good rate, let's say.
Yeah, that's fair. You're bringing up rates, and I'm sure it varies from country to country and person to person, depending on their experience and things. But generally, what kind of rates are you seeing people get?
So, I think that most companies like ours, I can tell you our rates. We tend to be between 30 and 45 an hour. And we tried to work with more experienced developers. So I think that most of our developers have at least 3 or 4 years of working experience. We don't like working with junior developers very much because ultimately you don't know what you're going to get. There's other companies out there that are more expensive. I've seen 45 to 90 an hour. I've seen 30 to 60. It really depends on the company. But I think starting at 30 in Latin America is pretty common. Then in Asia and other countries, it really varies. I've seen super low rates. I've seen $10 an hour from some companies in India, and there's also, there's developers here in the DR that will be charging 100 plus an hour. And so what we do is we'll sit down and say, okay, so what is an acceptable budget for you, and we'll try to work around that budget to find somebody who's really good within that rate.
That makes sense. So if you've convinced me or some other business manager, hey, look, maybe I should hire nearshore, which is within in the similar time zone to me, U.S. time zones. So that usually means South America or something close to the U.S.
Caribbean, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How do I get started with this? I mean, do I have to go through an agency like yours, or can I find people other ways?
There's several ways to do it. The first thing everybody tries is Upwork or Freelancer or one of those companies. There's ups and downs to that. So that kind of company will have generally lower overhead. I think generally between 5 and 20% above whatever the developer is getting. On the downside, there's pretty much no vetting. So anybody can get on there and create a profile. And there's a lot of shady stuff going on, I guess. There's a lot of developers working with somebody else, but they won't let you know about that. And ultimately, you just have to be careful, and you have to spend a lot of time kind of looking through different developers and trying to figure out who the right guy is for you. The other downside to that type of company is that they have a fairly large buyout fees. So if you decide at some point, I don't really want to go through this website's payment system. I want to hire this person directly. I haven't done it personally, but I know that they have pretty large fees to do that. There's other companies like ours, which are essentially staffing companies. We offer a little bit more personalized service. So we'll sit down with you, try to figure out what your business is, what your technical needs are, what your team looks like. And based on that, we'll create a profile of what this developer needs to look like. And we already have a network of developers that we regularly work with. So we'll look into that network and try to find somebody who's adequate. There's another, there are a number of other ways. If you have developer friends in Latin America, I would go ahead and ask them. They'll probably recommend somebody good.
Yeah, that's how I wound up with the guy that worked for me for a few years out of Argentina. Was he listened to the podcasts, and we wound up chatting, and then I wound up hiring him for some work, and then wound up hiring him for more work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
I don't think people really understand how powerful that network effect really is.
Yeah.
I see so many people. I see so many people getting great opportunities because of the people they know. And I also see a lot of other people missing out on opportunities because of their work history, because of like the communication issues we're talking about. I mean, just as someone will recommend that, yes, you should work with this person because she's awesome. They'll also say you probably want to avoid that person because they're unresponsive.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's really important to keep that in mind. That your reputation, good or bad, tends to follow you around, and that saves an individual developer who's looking for some help on a project. That saves them some time if they could just go to Twitter, go to their close circle of friends, go to business associates, and say, "I'm looking for someone to augment my team. Who can I go to?" And I suspect that's sort of what you provide, David, is sort of that.
Yeah, essentially that. Our largest source of developers by far is our other developers. So the first thing we'll do when we need a Node.js developer is we'll go ask another one, and we'll say, hey, we have this new project. We know you're busy. Do you have anybody you can recommend? And we'll put that person through a vetting process. But that generally results in finding new people that are really good at what they do. Mm-hmm. And likewise, the people that we've done work with that we've been happy with, we call them again. Sometimes we have a project that's a year long, 2 years long, and then the project will drop off. And whenever we have a new opportunity, that person will be our first pick because they have a good track record of working with us.
That makes sense.
David, that kind of leads into a question that I was going to ask you, which is this. All freelancers that I know and agencies that I've worked with have had a boom and bust cycle where they get really busy and then things get really slow and they get really busy and so on. How do you deal with that boom and bust cycle?
So I think we've dealt with it by selecting our customers carefully. So what we're looking for at BlueCoding, our company, is we look for smaller companies, which is the people we can serve the best, that have long-term projects. And long-term projects sometimes means they're an agency that has a continuous flow of projects. And sometimes it means they have one product that they're developing. And the reason we look for these specific types of clients is that the best developers already have jobs, and the only way we can convince them that we have a better opportunity for them and they should join us is if we can offer them a long-term engagement. And so we're looking for people who ideally have no end in sight to their projects. And that allows us also to offer more affordable rates. There are other companies out there that will have much higher rates, and then they'll cover the downtime, right? So they'll have the developer hired on with a monthly salary, and whenever there's work, good. Whenever there's not work, they'll have them working on internal projects probably.
One thing that I'm wondering about, I mean, most of this conversation has been pretty U.S. centric, or I guess first world centric, where we're in a wealthy country and we're trying to offshore, maybe save a little bit of money and find opportunities to get high quality developers from a market that isn't as competitive or hard to find people in. I'm curious, if I'm one of those people, let's say that I live in Latin America somewhere, how do I go about either meeting people or finding agencies like yours that are going to allow me to get the kind of work that I want? Because Upwork, it seems like it's kind of hit or miss if you're going to find somebody that'll actually hire you. So, yeah, what are my other options?
That's a tough question. The good thing for developers is that they only need one job at a time if it's a full-time job. So that they only need one hit. There's a lot of job boards that are used in each country. Each country has its own job boards that are mostly focused on local jobs. There's sites like Working Nomads, and I think we work remotely, where there are opportunities, from companies all over the world, but mostly Western Europe and the US and Canada. So those are places that I generally recommend people to look at. And then there's also, technology specific board jobs around. I don't recall any of them right now, but I remember there's a big Rails one. It's something like Rails Jobs. And so if you're a Rails developer, you might want to look into those. The truth is that it's pretty difficult to compete. If you're applying for a job that is from a U.S. company, it's paying a U.S. salary, then there's no real reason for somebody to hire you as opposed to an equally qualified developer in the U.S. So you have to be really good. And that's the first thing I tell developers that want to start working with us. I'll have a brief conversation with them, ask them what their work history is. And oftentimes I'll say, look, you're on the right path, but come back in a couple of years. You still need to gain some experience so that we can place you at the right jobs.
That makes sense. The other question I guess I have is, how do they demonstrate their expertise? I mean, is it harder to just even get looked at if you're from one of these Latin American countries as opposed to being in the U.S.?
I'm sure there's some prejudice in certain companies. I don't think it's that common. I have a number of friends that are working for Silicon Valley startups from the Dominican Republic, and they have very active GitHub profiles. They have a great work history, and the company is just looking for talent wherever they can find it. So I think that once you're top level talent, then it becomes a lot easier. I think that that's mainly it. If you're average as a developer, I think it's more difficult. It depends on how open the company is to hiring abroad also. There are certain complications that come with hiring abroad. Sometimes it's tax implications. Sometimes it's just, do I want to hire remotely, or would I rather have somebody in my city who can come to my office every once in a while? So there are some of those things that the company that's hiring needs to be aware of and needs to think about how they're going to handle. And that's also one of the things that we try to take care of. We take care of all the legal and tax implications for the developers, and our clients are just working with a US-based company.
So one more question that I have just related to a lot of this is, I had a conversation with somebody from Trinidad, I think, a while back. And so I'm putting together a course on how to find a job as a developer. It's mostly aimed at people who have been working in the industry for a few years and are looking for a better job. And it talks about the network effect that Brian mentioned. But anyway, when I was talking to this particular developer, he was new-ish. And there really wasn't a large community down there that he could go to kind of level up with friends or with any kind of in-person help. So if people are in that kind of a situation in Latin America, what are their options there? It seems like here in the U.S., you can still find a lot of English-speaking friendly opportunities. And down there, if you don't speak English or you're not connected to the community in some way, it feels a little bit harder to get to the point where you could actually then get hired.
Sure. So there are less networking opportunities down here. Depends a little bit on the country. Argentina, for example, has a big developer community. Chile does too. Brazil is a huge country, huge number of developers, and they've got their own things going on. And then there's a lot of smaller countries. Here in the Caribbean, for example, developer communities are smaller. In the Dominican Republic, we have a fairly active developer community in the capital, but where I am, there's pretty much nothing going on. So I'm in the same situation. How do I get involved with developers around me? It's difficult. I'd say that there's always a chance to try to join some open source projects. There's a number of Facebook groups or LinkedIn communities that one can join to try to be a little bit more involved. And then there's a lot of people that are actually making efforts to build development communities in this area. I have a friend who organized PyCon in the Caribbean, and it was a pretty big undertaking, for a country like ours. They had guests from at least a dozen countries. They had speakers from a number of places, and just setting all of that up was pretty complicated. But there are definitely people that are trying to work to make those things happen. And if you're a lonely developer in an island in the Caribbean, well, the first thing I'd say is try to find some online communities that you can join. There's a lot of places that are up there sharing ideas, sharing content. So that's a good place to start. And then try to attend events wherever they are near you.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I'm also trying to create an online community where people can come here that doesn't cost a lot. But, it's tricky for people to make all of that work. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a challenge.
I don't know if I have anything else to ask you. Is there anything else that people don't think about when they start thinking about this kind of thing?
Sure. There's a lot of things that they don't think about. Maybe I can bring up some of them. One of the most important things that I could bring up in terms of working remotely and being good at it, being successful at it, is that it's a two-part effort. From one side, the employer has to make sure that tools and the tools and the systems are in place so that can happen. But developer can also request them. So there's simple things that you can do. For example, make sure that if you have an in-house team and then you have some guys working remotely, make sure that everything is written somewhere online, right? If you use Slack, then write everything on Slack or write it on your project management tool, just because there's a lot of office talk that goes on and then you leave some developers out. So you have to make those developers really feel like part of your team. Another thing is that there's a lot of things that I would encourage that some companies don't think of. Things like code reviews in pair programming, which look like an additional cost, but ultimately really bring up the quality of the code and allow the developers that are remote to feel like a real part of the team.
This episode is sponsored by Hired.com. Are you searching for a new job? That can be stressful, scary, and time-consuming. Pushy recruiters try to sell you on roles you don't actually want, and the job boards make you feel like you're throwing your resume into a black hole, never to be seen again. And sometimes you go all the way through the interview process just to find out at the very end that the salary, offer, or company culture doesn't match what you're looking for. Hired is the world's most intelligent talent matching platform for full-time and contract opportunities in engineering, development, design, product management, data science, sales, and marketing. We make your job search faster, focused, and stress-free. Instead of endlessly applying to companies and hoping for the best, Hired puts you in control of when and how you connect with compelling new opportunities. After completing one simple application, top employers apply to hire you, and on Hired you will receive personal interview requests and upfront salary information so you can make informed decisions about what opportunities to pursue over a condensed timeline. Hired offers access to more than 4,000 innovative employers, including big brand names like Facebook and smaller emerging startups. The size and type of company you want to connect with is totally up to you. And we help you find new opportunities in 17 major cities in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Open to relocation? Let them know. Your privacy and autonomy in your job search is of utmost importance. And if you sign up today using the show's link, that's hired.com/rubyrogues, you can get double the normal hiring bonus. That's $600 instead of $300. So go check them out at hired.com/rubyrogues.
Makes sense to me.
Makes sense to me. I have a question. There's a lot of areas around the country. I'm going to take a kind of a localized area, Minneapolis, St. Paul, versus Duluth, Minnesota, which is a couple hours north of there. Mm-hmm. Hiring software developers in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area is it's expensive to hire local developers, and so some of the companies in that area they're doing something called onshoring, where they're essentially hiring people from Duluth and Superior, Wisconsin, and other smaller areas where the cost of living is lower. If that's an opportunity, if you have a company that's willing to hire a remote developer, what would come down to why would you choose to go with someone in another country as opposed to someone in the same country? I'm just sort of wondering, because I can think of a few reasons myself, but I'd love to hear what your experience tells you.
Yeah. So one thing is definitely cost. What kind of rates are we talking about in Minneapolis, for example? What are your thoughts on rates?
Well, it's funny when you say that you've got people that are getting that you've got people that are $35, $45 an hour, and if I do the math on that, that's around 90 or so. If you've got a full-time job, it's about $90,000 a year. In the United States, it's going to be 1099 work, so the person's going to be responsible for their own taxes. But that's still, you've got some developers working in the areas where I'm at. I'm in a town. I'm east of Minneapolis, about 80 or 90 minutes away. And the software development rates here are anywhere from $60,000 to $85,000 a year. That's what the salary is here.
Yep.
So it seems like you've got benefits involved in that too. So if you're hiring someone full time, but if you're hiring someone as a contractor, I'm kind of wondering. You're not talking about the $10 an hour, the $10 an hour rates that some places charge.
Yeah,
you're talking about a higher rate. So it's a lot more. I guess that was the biggest surprise with talking to you here, is that I was surprised that the rates were higher than I thought they were going in. So
yeah, no, definitely, and that's a common thing that we need to discuss with our clients. The first thing I ask them is, okay, so what type of developer are you looking for? Let's have a conversation to try to figure out that, and then what is your budget? Because depending on what your budget is, we can find somebody for you in one place or in another. Ultimately, our goal is to find the best developer possible for your project that fits within your budget, and we have had great developers at $20 an hour. Really, really good guys. And then we've had great developers at $40 an hour. And a big factor was cost of living. So if you live in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, cost of living is just really high. It's pretty much, it's very close to the US in a lot of senses. And so their rates are higher. Again, it depends on where you are in the US. So we have, a number of clients in New York, and for them, they're paying half of what they would pay there, for example. The other factor is, how easy is it for you to find developers in smaller cities in the U.S. Where the cost of living is lower? We have never thought of focusing in the U.S. as a place for finding developers, but just having this conversation with you makes me realize that is definitely a possibility. And to answer your first question, which was why would we go look in Brazil when we have good developers right nearby whose rates are even potentially lower? Well, the only real reason I can give you is that we want to find a really good developer, and how easy is it for you to find that really good developer, in that smaller town? It's a matter of the fact that we have a network in Latin America. We don't necessarily have a network in the U.S. So much, and so when we have a new Rails job that we need to fill, we already know where to reach out to in Latin America.
Sure, it's good. Again, it's that network effect. I was going to wonder. This is one of my thoughts, and I'm not sure how true this is. But when we talk about the cost of living, I know what the health insurance system is here in the United States, but I'm not that familiar with what it is in Latin America. But I suspect that also has something to do with the cost with the rates and the cost of living, because a person who's working remotely or freelancing here in the United States has to cover the cost of their medical coverage themselves as well.
So yeah, it depends on the country. So I'll give you an interesting example, which is the Dominican Republic. Basically, the law in Dominican Republic states that if you work for somebody as a contractor or as an employee for more than 3 months, you're just considered an employee. And what that means is that if I hire somebody from BlueCoding in the US for more than 3 months, then suddenly I owe them, a bunch of benefits, Social Security, or the equivalent, which is we have health insurance, we have pension fund, they have vacations, they have severance. So there's a bunch of things that get factored into that. And that's part of what drives the salaries down in some of those countries, is that the companies have to deal with all of that. So it depends on the country how we handle it. Dominican Republic is a country where we'll potentially hire people directly as employees, and so they'll get a lower salary than they would if they were working as contractors, but they'll get all the benefits. And then there's other countries that just allow developers to work as freelancers for the long term. And what we need to ensure is that they're actually paying their taxes properly and they're reporting everything properly. Health insurance in Latin America tends to be cheaper. A lot of countries have either good public health or they have cheaper insurance plans. As you know, the cost of healthcare in general is probably lower, so the health insurance is cheaper in general. But there's a lot of things to consider. There's taxes, there's vacation time, there's all these things that a contractor in the U.S. would have to consider too.
I want to bring something up real quick, and I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole with this, but I do want to mention it. And that is the distinction between hourly rates and annual salaries. Because a lot of people will think like, okay, if I'm making $100,000 a year, that's $50 an hour times 2,000 hours in a year is $100,000 a year. And I think I've heard, actually, Chuck, I think I've heard you talk about this on the Freelancers show some time ago, how people come up with their freelance rates that way. But it really doesn't work that way. Because if you charge $50 an hour as a freelancer, you're not going to make $100,000 a year, because you don't get paid vacation, and you're not going to be steadily utilized your whole entire time. And so really you're probably going to make something more like $50,000 a year if you charge $50 an hour. So that's like from the freelancers end. And then from the employer's end, I don't know this because I've never been on that end, but I understand that your fully loaded cost for an employee is probably going to be closer to twice that employee's salary. And correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows better.
Yeah, it's closer to about 40%. In most cases. But I mean, when I threw out the number, I was doing that math in my head. I was doing it based on the fact that David was talking about bringing people onto a project for full time. And that becomes tricky because to Jason's point, I think it's really important that everybody who's thinking about going into freelancing keep that in mind, because if you do the math as I did in my head and the math that Jason suggested, you also have to think about the fact that you're lucky to get, if you're freelancing, because I've done this before, you're lucky to get a full day. You're lucky to get 4 hours of work done, because the other 4 hours you're chasing down billing, you're doing invoicing, you're doing some marketing, things like that. And a long time ago, the Freelance Switch website used to have this amazing calculator that made you answer about 100 questions to help you compute your freelance rate, and that's gone now. So if anybody has any links to something like that, that'd be nice to share too.
So just looking at it from the developer's perspective, there's a couple of things to consider. So one is that when you're working on one of these projects, there's always a chance that it's going to end. Unfortunately, if the person the client who's hiring you has 5 employees and suddenly their budget is running out, our remote developers are the first ones to be cut. It's an unfortunate situation, but we understand. And so what we try to do on our side is we try to find them work as soon as possible. But there is always, the possibility of downtime with this kind of work. The other thing is that they're covering all of their benefits. So a lot of companies in the U.S. will give you different benefits. Sometimes it's vacation time, it's good health insurance, and there's a number of things that do add on to the total cost of having an employee. Here in Dominican Republic, we've calculated about 50% above whatever we're paying the employee. And there's different ways to do it in the U.S. depending on what kind of benefits you're giving. And then there's other things to consider just with remote developers versus on-site, office space, equipment, all that kind of stuff.
So one thing that I'm wondering about, and Jason actually said this was his question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What kind of companies are typically looking for this sort of solution to their staffing problem?
Well, I can't tell you what kind of companies. I can tell you the ones that we've worked with at least.
Okay.
And I'm saying I can't tell you which kind of companies because we haven't had a lot of experience working with medium to large companies. Most of our clients have been smaller companies. And there's some common things that I've seen most of them have. They're usually 1 to 20 employees, I think. They have a lot of work, development work, long-term development work. And we found that there's generally 3 sectors. One is companies that are not tech companies, but that do have an important tech component to them. So, for example, we have some clients that are online shops, and they have probably a team of 5 that manages everything, but they don't really have an in-house developer. And so we kind of provide them with somebody who can be their CTO and developer at the same time. And that requires, a type of developer that has experience understanding things from the business perspective. Then we have some clients that are digital agencies that just have a lot of work coming in. And so they have enough work where they can move a developer from one project to another with pretty much no downtime. And then we have a number of clients that are startups or actually established companies that have software or are developing a software product. And need to maintain it in the long term. And most of these are, companies that have been building their product for at least a year or two, have a roadmap of how to get where they're looking to get, and are self-funded. We have had some companies that weren't self-funded, that weren't bootstrapped, but those are always kind of dangerous because they tend to hire 3-4 developers and then their money runs out and then they have to cut down. So we're trying to avoid that kind of situation, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I stole your question, Jason.
I'm very upset, and you and I are going to have to talk about this later.
Jason, I think you wanted to know how we find clients.
Yeah, but Chuck stole my question, and then I told a joke that nobody laughed at.
No, but actually, I wasn't answering that specific question. I think Chuck asked me what type of companies we're reaching out to.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
As to how we find clients.
I'm off the hook.
It's a mixed bag. We're still trying to figure out in long measure, but one of the main ways is references. In general, the people that we've worked with have been very happy with our work. The thing that's most important to our credibility is how well we vet developers. And so we've had to say, we don't have a developer for you. We're sorry. Go look somewhere else. And the reason is that we'd much rather do that than introduce somebody who is not a good fit for the project. Once we do that, we're in trouble. So we've had a lot of references. A lot of it has been networking, different conferences, different people we've met online. And then we've also done some cold calling, which has been successful sometimes and not so successful other times. I'm sure you guys have all received tens of emails from companies in India that are looking to do the same thing as we are. I feel that we are offering a high quality service, but it's hard to convey that via email. So I think that a lot of our clients now are just coming through friends.
Makes sense.
So if there's a company out there that wants to hire Latin American developers, or on the other end of things, if there is a Latin American developer who thinks that you might be able to help find them work, what do you recommend?
You can go to our site, www.bluecoding.com. Blue as in the color. We have a little section that says join the team if you're a developer, and you can drop us a note if you're looking for a developer. Either way, it all starts with a little conversation. So if it's a developer, we'll receive their CV. We'll have a little chat with them and see what they've been doing and what they're looking to do. If we have a position available at the time where they might be able to be a good fit, we'll put them through a vetting process. And if we don't at that time, then we'll add them to our database of developers. And we kind of tag them with the technologies that they work with. And so once we have a project come in, then we'll look them up and give them a call, see if they're still available, and try to put them through the vetting process. If you're a company that's looking to hire developers, it's fairly simple. We want to have a call with you and try to figure out what you're looking for. And, that means what are you building? What industry are you in? What does your team look like? And what difficulties you're facing? We've had clients come and ask for developers, and they actually didn't need them. What they needed was a better project management process. So we'll try to help them figure that out. And if we determine that you actually do need a developer, we'll try to figure out what that developer looks like, what his skills are in terms of technologies that they're going to be using, in terms of seniority, what kind of people skills do they need. And we will go and find somebody who has those. we put everybody through an extensive vetting process, and the vetting process is a number of interviews, some of them technical, some of them not. But ultimately, we want to introduce 1 or 2 developers max, and we want to say, look, these are the 2 guys that we think might be a good fit for your project. Let's have a conversation with them. Once our clients meet these developers and are able to have a little conversation with them, we want 2 things. 1, we want the clients to feel comfortable with the developers. Is this somebody who you would like to work with? And the second thing is we want the developers to feel comfortable with the clients. So it's a 2-way street. We've had developers back out of deals because they didn't feel comfortable with the opportunity. And that wasn't going to work out with us because ultimately we want these to be long-term relationships. We're not looking for 3-month projects. We're looking for long-term ones.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks.
Dear Ruby developer, are you sick and tired of working on crappy old legacy code bases? There's got to be a better way. If you want to get a better job, here's what you can do. Find a technology that's really in demand, build a side project using that technology, and then use that side project as experience to get your next better job. I've done this myself several times. It definitely works. What I think is a really good technology to learn right now is Angular. Angular is really in demand right now, and it's not going away anytime soon. I have a free guide to getting started with Angular and Rails at angularonrails.com/rr. Good luck and enjoy this episode of Ruby Rogues.
Jason, what are your picks?
Okay, so I have one single pick, and it is, I'm just reading the description on Amazon, Samsonite Colombian leather flap over laptop messenger bag. It's the laptop briefcase I bought recently. I had just been lugging my laptop around in a backpack for a long time. And since I'm not in high school anymore, I thought maybe I should have a grown-up bag. And so I bought this online, and it's been really great. And I'll probably have it for years and years to come. Definitely worth the money. So check it out.
Nice. I have a really nice bag like that, but it started to give me shoulder issues, so I had to switch.
Same. I went back to the backpack for that same reason. I had a nice shoulder bag. It looked all professional. Now I look like a guy who's trying to crash high school or something like that.
Yep.
So,
do you have some picks for us, Brian?
I have one pick as well. I have that MacBook with the touch bar on it, and I'm one of the rare people that enjoys that touch bar because it actually does something for me, because I'm using an app that I've used for a long time called Better Touch Tool. Better Touch Tool is great because it lets you do keyboard shortcuts and mouse gestures and things like that. But they have support for making your own customized stuff for the touch bar too. So you can, if you've got all this blank space up there because the app you're using doesn't support it, you can go ahead and put your own stuff up there, and you can make things that are globally available on the touch bar, and you can make shortcuts that are application specific. So I've got some special things for when I do presentations on my touch bar that I can just activate. Now all of a sudden I have quick keys on my touch bar for switching between my presentation software and my terminal, and it's really handy, and the web browser. And so it's just really handy to be able to take control over that thing. And I think it's if you find yourself with one of these laptops, maybe from work, or maybe you bought one because you needed an upgrade and you're just not getting what you need out of the touch bar, check out Better Touch Tool. There's a nice trial for it. The application is not that expensive, and it's incredibly powerful when you dig into it.
I'll admit to having been a little bit skeptical of the touch bar. I'll jump in with a couple of picks here. So things are picking up a little bit with the show, and I guess I ought to talk about this at some point on the show. So if you've been listening to Ruby Rogues for a while and you're subscribed to the RSS feed, you'll notice that I have spun up a new show called My Ruby Story, and I've been putting it on the Ruby Rogues feed. In fact, if you're paying attention in your podcast app, it actually now says All Ruby Podcasts by devchat.tv. So hint, hint, I'm working on another two, actually. So, kind of keep that in your head. If you want just Ruby Rogues, you can actually go subscribe to Ruby Rogues only. If you want just the My Ruby Story, then you can go check those out as well. And yeah, all of that's going on. One other thing that I'm going to pick here really quickly is something that I've been working on. And I owe a little bit of an explanation to the audience with this. I was going to put on a Ruby remote conf. I think it was next week or the week after. And I had a bunch of stuff come up. I couldn't quite line up all the speakers that I wanted. And then I ran across this format for online events. That's the online summit. And I really like the idea. So if you were planning on attending Ruby Remote Conf, of course, this will probably come out after the conference was supposed to be held. I'm pulling together Ruby Dev Summit or Ruby Developer Summit. You go to rubydevsummit.com. A few things that I've changed. One is that it's free to attend. The Ruby Remote Conf would have cost you, I think, $100 or something to attend. You can get an all-access pass that gets you into the Slack room, and I'm going to have some bonuses for that. And you'll get the recordings down. You can download the recordings after the conference if you would like with the all-access pass. But if you want to just attend, you just put your email address in, and you'll get emails about speaker announcements and reminders to show up when the talks are. So I'm super excited about that. I'm going to run it for a week. It's going to be, it looks like the third week in October. Two of the keynote speakers that I'm talking to right now, I may have to move it back a week. So it's either going to be the 16th through the 21st or the 23rd through the 30th or something like that. So anyway, keep an eye out for that. Going to have some awesome speakers. I'm reaching out to them right now. Yeah, I'm super excited about it. So go check that out. And then also Ruby Rogues Parlay. I've moved it over to a Slack channel. I don't quite have enough people to start paying people to come and do presentations for us yet. But as soon as I have 20, 30, 40 people in there, paying $10 a month, I'm going to dedicate most, if not all of that money, depending on how much it costs to get somebody to come talk to us for an hour, to come speak to us. So, I'm hoping to line up some folks and see what we can make happen that way. So definitely go check those out. I know that I've talked a lot about my own stuff here, but yeah, that's kind of what I've been working on in the meantime for everybody here. And yeah, David, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, I have three, if that's okay. I'll be quick about them. But the first is MicroConf. I don't know if anybody has brought that up here, but it was my first time attending MicroConf. This year I was able to go in April to the Growth Edition, and it was fantastic. It was a small conference. I think we had about a little bit less than 300 participants. Is that right?
Something like that. It was terrific, though. I agree with you there.
Yeah, but there were two things that were particularly interesting for me. One was the mix of content. We had a lot of stuff on marketing, which I'm not good at, so I learned a lot on that side. We had, one speaker bring up some accounting things that were really important for SaaS companies, and I didn't explain what it was, but basically it's a conference for bootstrapped SaaS companies. And, the thing that I benefited from the most was a bunch of great contacts that I made. So I met a lot of cool people, had opportunity to speak to some people that were now working with either as clients or providing them services, and that was great. On my way back from MicroConf, I passed through New York, which brings me to my second pick. I went to visit a client there, and my Lenovo laptop, it's a gaming laptop that I've been using for a couple of years. It died. I'm a Ruby on Rails developer, so I basically need to work on either Linux or Mac. And I had this huge, heavy laptop that I had ran a virtual machine on so that I could run Rails, and it died. And I needed to continue to work. So I went out to the closest Best Buy and I bought a MacBook Air. So we have two MacBooks as picks. And it was the simplest, cheapest MacBook Air that I could find. And so far I'm loving it. It's much, much, much lighter than my heavy Lenovo gaming laptop. And it does the job just fine. And then finally, there's a book called The 1 Minute Manager. Have any of you heard of it?
Mm-mm.
Oh yeah, I've heard of it.
Oh yeah, well it's a great book. It's by Kenneth Blanchard, and it's a little story. It's about 70 pages, I think. It's a story about a guy who's out to find the best manager, and it just has some simple principles. It has 3 or 4 principles in it that have been really, really good for our team. We have a small in-house team of 5 people, and we work with a number of developers that are not in office, but it has really helped us get things on track. So those are my 3 picks.
Nice. And we asked people how to connect with your company. If they want to see what you're doing these days, are you on Twitter or GitHub or have a blog, or what's the best way to?
Yeah, sure. We have a blog on Medium. It's medium/blue-coding. We haven't been able to set the subdomain up yet properly. But you can check out www.bluecoding.com. We'll always keep everything up to date there. And you can also email me at david@bluecoding.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. Thank you for coming, David.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. We'll catch everyone next week.
Bye, guys.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN.
Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.